All right, everybody. Travis Watkins here, going live yet again. It's Monday afternoon, and I'm going to be dropping some IRS knowledge on you here today. And I promise if you stick around and listen to the whole thing, I'm going to drop some real knowledge here at the very end. I'm going to give you some free tax advice if you've got an IRS problem that's going to be, worth the entire listen. But what we're talking about here today is if you've got an IRS problem, including some unfiled returns. So in other words, you haven't filed for at least 1 or more years, in addition to having some balance on one of those other years. In other words, you've already filed on other years, but you've got some years that you haven't filed on, then take a listen up because this is all for you. And so just stick with me here and let's get started, all right? We've talked over the last few days about getting IRS transcripts and how important that is to solving your tax problem. If you've got a tax problem and you need to diagnose the nature and extent of that problem like you would when you go to see the doctor if you were sick or go to the emergency room, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to run some tests. They're going to ask you some questions. They're going to try to figure out, hey, what's going on here? You go to the mechanic, they're going to take a look under the hood, try to diagnose what the problem is. And the way that you do that with an IRS problem is by getting those wage and income transcripts if you have returns that haven't been filed, or getting your account transcripts, which show pretty much the entire situation over the course of at least 10 years on what's going on with your tax problem. There's also that IMFOLT, that IMFOLT return that we talked about last week, that is a really, really important transcript because it shows how long the IRS, what the last date is that they can come after you for a past due tax debt. And that was some additional knowledge that I dropped on you with that IMFOLT tax transcript. But these other things that I've been talking about real generally are all from my book that I created a few years back called The Ultimate Survival Guide for IRS Problems. And you can pick up a copy of that. You can download it, in fact, right now, for free at no cost to you at traviswatkins.com. All right, back to what I was talking about there. Why is it so important, beyond the obvious, to file a tax return when you've got some out there and you have a IRS problem that you want to solve? Well, first of all, the IRS will not talk to you about dealing with other tax years that may be at issue until you have all the cards on the table. In other words, you have all your returns at least filed and assessed before they'll talk to you about another tax year. For instance, if you've got a problem with 2012, let's say, but you've got 2016 and 17 unfiled, they're not going to release, let's say, a levy, if they have a levy out there against you, until you've at least made some arrangements with them to file those returns, 16 and 17 in that example, and get those assessed so that the IRS can see the entire situation of what's going on with your tax problem. You've got to give them all the returns that are at issue before they'll deal with you on any specific year in particular. The common misconception, I guess, that a lot of folks have when they come in with an IRS problem is they may have been lulled into a little bit of a synthetic type of security there, that since the IRS hasn't come after them for some period of years and they haven't filed for a period of years, that maybe somehow they're off the hook and they won't have to file. That's one situation that's pretty common among taxpayers with tax issues. And the other one is, hey man, I'm flying under the radar. They haven't done anything to me yet. if I start filing, aren't they going to kind of jump out of the woodwork and play gotcha? And to be completely honest with both of those scenarios, I guess the answer to that is, well, it depends. Common lawyer answer, right? Yeah, maybe they'll come after you. Maybe they'll jump out of the woodwork. Maybe they won't. But the point is, something's bothering you right now and causing you to get your attention focused on getting your IRS problem solved. And that is really the only way home with these types of problems. So I guess it's kind of an irrelevant question in the big picture, because whether they are going to jump out of the woodwork with you filing returns, which I think is probably pretty rare. If you haven't filed in some period of time and you start filing and start paying, well, that's a good thing, and the IRS sees it as such. But I think the most important thing here is that, first of all, filing is just plain required by our tax system, and there's really no way around that. So when people say, well, should I file this year, not that year, my answer is a qualified, well, it's the law anyway, and you need to do that. It's a misdemeanor, in fact, which carries up to a year in prison. And have I ever seen a situation like that? Of course. The IRS does this routinely, mostly with tax protesters, folks that essentially just say, I'm not filing, I'm not paying because it's not required by the Constitution. That's a common one. That this is some type of voluntary system that our forefathers, made it voluntary and not required. Well, the voluntary part is that you do it as opposed to the IRS doing it for you. You volunteer to do this under penalties of perjury, in fact, to file an accurate return, and that's the extent of the voluntary system. But anyway, on to the next thing. The reason that you would want to file, of course, is that the IRS shares, I say, the same motto as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and that is that they always get their man or woman, as the case may be. It may take them a while to get around to it, but I can assure you that the prevailing theme at the IRS, especially in the IRS collections scheme at the IRS, is that they will, at some point, catch up with you and make you pay, and make you pay dearly in some situations for not filing your returns. So simply put, let's file some returns. The last reason why you would want to file some returns is that if you don't file your returns, then the IRS is going to do what's called a substitute for return, or as we call it, an SFR. And that's just government speak for they do a return for you, and they use those exact same transcripts, those wage and income type transcripts, where folks that you work for, folks that have paid you and have filed 1099s or W-2s, as the case may be, they file those timely so that they can take those as deductions on their own business returns. They file those on you. The IRS, as we've seen, keeps that information on virtually every taxpayer. And if you don't file for some amount of time, typically at least 3 years, because that's the amount of time that they can charge what's called a failure to file penalty against you. So they want that full 3 years of penalties and associated interest to accrue on top of that. They will take those wage and income transcripts and file these nasty little buggers called SFR, substitute for returns. And those things are terrible. They give you no deductions, no exemptions, no real room to breathe on that. You're making them file a return for you, and so therefore they have to make a bunch of assumptions like, well, you just didn't have any expenses that year apparently, but you did make some money, and therefore they're going to charge all that as taxable income to you, and it spits out a nasty number when they do an SFR for you. And they include penalties and interest on you as well. So that's another reason why you would want to do this return for yourself instead of having them do it for you. And these are all outlined in the Ultimate Survival Guide for IRS Problems, which you can get through a free download at traviswatkinsbook.com. I see it's up there. It's in my left-hand corner up there at the top of the screen. And go get yourself that book. It outlines quite a bit of what we're talking about here today. But moving on, you can, of course, do these returns yourself. And I know it's probably a little bit weird for a tax professional who does past due returns for a living and current returns as well to be advising you to maybe do these on your own. But here's the thing. For all the reasons that we've mentioned and many more, doing something here, doing the things that I'm saying to at least do it yourself is better than doing nothing. Because these things are required, and there is nothing that you can do in the way of getting some relief for yourself if you don't do the returns. And so if you must do them yourself, here's a few pointers on how to get that done. Of course, if you hire a professional, which in most situations you probably should, you're going to be paying probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about $500 at least for a 1040 personal return, more if it's a Schedule C. In other words, you're filing business expenses and such on your personal return, then that would be more with a tax professional. But in certain situations, especially when you need to get them done right now and you don't have the money, let's say, to get a professional to do them, there are programs that the IRS offers for those, and of course you're always free to do them yourself. Now, what's the advantage of having a tax professional like myself do them? Well, first of all, we're quicker than most individuals are that don't have any tax return experience. We do them accurately and quickly, because the last thing that you want in this process, if you're facing an IRS problem and you have unfiled returns, you don't want to run into an audit. That's compounding your problem here. So in other words, if you're filing a bad return and you've got questionable expenses and you've done it sloppy and you don't include all your income, because again, that's a huge part of the return, probably the most important thing that they're caring about, less so with what expenses and deductions you're taking, is the amount of income that you're listing, and are those matching up with those wage and income transcripts that we talked about in previous videos. So if you really want to be safe about it and you want to be quick, you're staring down the barrel of a levy, let's say, then reach out to a tax professional like myself, 1-800-721-7054, and we can do those for you quickly and accurately to avoid that ugly audit. All right. Kind of the next thing that I would recommend that you do here when you have past due returns, we've talked about this also in previous videos, is start with this year's tax return. Get that on file, and get it on file on time, and get it paid on time, because that is a huge cornerstone in attacking any tax problem, is showing the IRS that you're getting back in the system, that you are filing and paying on time. And if you haven't made any quarterly payments for, let's say, for 2018, which is just coming right around the corner here, they'll start accepting those just any day now, then still go ahead and get it filed and pay the lump sum of what you may owe. And if you can't pay, then talk to the IRS about getting some more time, first of all, to file the missing returns, and to get into some type of a payment plan at the very least to keep those collectors, those revenue officers, at bay at the IRS. All right, so start with this year. Even if you don't have the money to make the payment on whatever it says that you may owe, file the return. Get the return on file. Stop the the madness, first of all, stop the failure to file penalty from at least accruing, because it's nasty. Once you have filed this, the most recent tax year, and at least gotten that on file, and people are going to ask on here, I have no doubt, whether they should or could file a return, a extension to October 15th to get this done. And the answer is that if you make a timely request to the IRS, meaning before April 15th or on April 15th for a extension, then yes, you can extend this year's tax return filing, or excuse me, yes, filing, but not pay. And that's important. Let me say it again clearly. You can extend the filing date, but you cannot extend the time in which you must pay that. So if you file a timely extension before the 15th of April, and then you file a return timely after your extension in October, and it shows that you owe, you're still going to have penalties and accruing interest on what you should have paid back on April the 15th. So it's a extension to file, not an extension to pay. So once you've done that, then you need to start systematically working backwards, I always say, through the tax years that you haven't filed. And again, getting your transcripts, your wage and income transcripts are going to be a huge part of that. Getting your account transcript to see which returns have not been filed is a huge part of that, and we've talked about that in previous videos, and some of that is also outlined in my free book, The Ultimate Survival Guide for IRS Problems, available at traviswatkinsbook.com. Once you have filed that, in this case 2018 return, and made arrangements to pay that or to extend the filing on it, start working backwards to 2017, 2016, 2015, and start expeditiously, in other words, quickly, getting those suckers on file. And how do you do that? If you use a tax professional, which I would highly recommend to do in a situation like this, since these are old returns, and most tax professionals have the software to make those filings quickly and accurately, then do that. If you don't have the means to do that, there are several different places that you can go here to get that started. You can go online to the IRS and get forms and instructions there to file your return. That's available on irs.gov in the forms and publications. That, as you can imagine, is a pretty challenging process, especially if you don't have any previous experience filing tax returns. So what I would do if I was in this situation and I didn't want to, for some reason, or couldn't retain a tax professional to get this done, I would go to TurboTax or one of those online services and get their back software, some of which is available online. I took a look here just a few minutes ago at TurboTax. That's turbotax.intuit.com under personal taxes, past years, products. They've got several pricing plans for 2017, 2016, and 2015. Surprisingly, it goes down. 17 is more expensive than 15. And then there's several different things to choose from there. It doesn't go back, at least in an online format, past 2015. So if you have returns that go back longer than that, past 2015, then you're going to need to make other types of arrangements. I haven't looked around on other sites such as H&R Block or one of those to see what their products are for something like that. And they have different package plans, some of which are for investments in rental property, small business owner or sole props. They do have some business returns there. Again, that's one, if you have business returns, if you're filing an 1120 corporate return and in other words, you've made the election with the IRS to be taxed as a corporation, and or you have done an S corp election is another reason. I would go ahead and at the very least get with a tax professional to try to get those 1120s filed. Worst case scenario, go to TurboTax or one of those related type do-it-yourself sites and do that. I think there's also some free stuff out there on the web. I can't vouch for any of those things, and I don't know how far back those things go. But again, doing something here is better than doing nothing at all. The things that I'm saying to do are better than not doing the things that I'm saying to do here. You've got to get filed so you can start putting this problem behind you. Next thing that I would do here, if you have returns that go back past 2015, you can't get the old software there online. I just did another quick search here. I went to eBay, the old eBays, and just typed in 2014 TurboTax, and boom, up came 75 results of different types of products, some of which are brand new, some of which are pre-owned. Anywhere from $29.95, well, lower than that, $12.99 for a pre-owned copy of your bare bones 2014 tax returns, preparation packets, all the way up to, I'm just scanning through here, $129 for a free one, or excuse me, for a business one with free shipping. But you get the point. If you need to go back past 2015, you can get these they're in disk format, most of them. And a very important thing to mention here, when you're talking about old returns, you have to send these in to the IRS the old-fashioned way. In other words, you've got to mail them in. And here's a little tip on the mailing process. Always, when you're filing a swath of returns, in other words, you've got a whole block of returns there for 2014 through 17, let's say. Best practices here for an individual or a professional is, in my opinion, to always go back and file these separately and mail them separately, and do that certified mail, return receipt requested. You may or may not get that return receipt back. It costs about, I don't know, anywhere from $8 to $15 depending on where you are, but it's worth the extra expense to go ahead and do those separately and put them in their own separate envelope, because why? The IRS tends to lose these things, and I don't know why that is per se, but my guess is that when they see a 2016 return on top, the 2016 tax guy puts it in his bin for processing, and the 15, 14, 13, and 12 that were behind it may or may not make it to that department that's supposed to be examining and assessing those returns. I would always, on a past due return, also write at the top of that audit reconsideration. It's just an extra belt and suspenders. It means that we are filing an original return there that has not previously been in there, and if the IRS is going to was in the process of or has already filed a substitute for return SFR, then that tips them off that this is coming over the top of those things, which you are encouraged, by the way, to do. When you have an SFR, always file over the top of that sucker, because they are rarely, if ever, completely accurate. All right. So we've been through the eBay parts of this. If you can't get the old returns straight off the interwebs, please go to eBay and at the very least get that, and get that software, get the disk, and do this yourself, and be sure to mail it in separate years and be sure to get a record of that somehow. My recommendation is through certified mail return receipt requested. All right. So we've been through quite a few things here today on filing past due taxes, and as I told you at the beginning, I was going to do a big reveal for you, some big free information that should come in handy when you're talking about old past due returns. This is the number one question that we get when we have someone come in who has not filed in some period of time. And as you may guess, if you've got a swath of these and they go back 20 years or something, the taxpayer always wants to know, do I have to file all 20 years going back here? And again, the the good lawyer answer is maybe, depending, right, on what that tax transcript, your account transcript shows. And what I mean by that is if your tax transcript, your account transcript shows that the IRS, for example, has done multiple years of substitutes for returns and they were, 8, 10, 12, 15 years ago, yes, my advice is go ahead and at least prepare those returns and put them side by side with those. And if you agree that you need to file a return, or should I say, if you disagree with the number that they have come up with or how they came up with that return, you need to file an original return over the top of that market audit reconsideration, because that is an audit. But other things considered, if the IRS has not started the process on substitute for returns that are over 6 years old, and that's the magic number, all things considered, you've got to file the last 6 returns that you haven't filed, and that comes as huge, great news to a lot of people that have more than that, but that's pretty much the industry standard on a swath of returns that you have not prepared in some time. So if you haven't filed in some years, you don't have to necessarily file them all. File the last 6, and as I mentioned, file the most recent one so you can get back into the system and get started paying back those taxes or getting into something with the IRS that keeps them off of your back and does so for good. All right. All these things, as I mentioned, are within my book. Not all of them. I gave you some freebies here today, including some direction on where you might go to get some help filing these things if you feel like you must file them on your own, or if you are financially incapable of getting a tax professional to help you with those things. I hope those came of great value to you. But most of those things are on TravisWatkinsBook.com, and you can get your free copy of that at that website. If you want us to do all these things for you, if you have old returns, or even if you just have this year's return that is coming right around the corner to being due, call us right now at 1-800-721-7054, and we do all these things for you. And I hope you have a great day here today, and we'll get back with you pretty soon with more free tax help. Thanks a lot.